So our guest today is Michelle Fritsch, and she is with Retirement Wellness Strategies, and you can go to retirewellness.com. Michelle, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting me. I always love being here.
So today, Michelle is going to provide us with a lot of value in the form of inspiration. You know, information is really important, but inspiration is so much better. And so today we're going to be talking about the emotional side, the physical side, how to keep your patients active emotionally, active physically, in all the different areas of their life, and what physicians can do, the practical handles, the take action steps that you can take to help them help themselves, because a patient who is appreciated will always do more than is expected. So Michelle, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you again for the invitation.
So I'm going to let you recap, because we're starting part 2 in our series with Michelle. Go ahead and just summarize what we talked about in part 1.
I'll do it. So part 1, we talked about physical health, which is what we do as practitioners, but we delved a little bit more into making sure we've got the whole picture when addressing a patient, but also the risk factors. What can we do focused a little bit more on prevention than maybe we typically do? And we put it in the context of just the amount of stress, excuse me, the amount of stress that people are under. And I know I have found over the years that it's the way I ask the questions that kind of bring out the information that uncovers things that might have been lost before. And so over time, I've learned to just be so much more focused on prevention, on better understanding family history, personal history, including, accidents and injuries that people have had in the past, pulling forward some of the newer sciences such as pharmacogenomics, and creating that bigger, broader, long-term action plan to keep people physically healthy. And then toward the end, we even talked about that as physicians, a lot of times self-care gets a little bit lost in the mix. You're so busy caring for everyone else. And so thinking about your own long-term plan of any risks that you could start mitigating now, steps you could take now to assure yourself a longer, healthier time after medicine. And then we put all that in context of sort of broader health, which is beyond the physical. And today we'll delve a little bit more into some of those other aspects, like the mental and the emotional and the spiritual and the social health, and how to pull those together. And just a tiny recap. Last time you asked me, well, why do I do this? I'm a clinical pharmacist. I'm board certified in geriatrics. So caring for aging adults has always been my passion, but I want to be on the front end of that, rather than wait until all the things have happened and people are at the end of their life. So I focus on people kind of mid 50s to mid 70s, and how to keep them healthy, let them reach all of those goals they have for all of the rest of the phases of their life. And part of that comes from just almost 30 years in practice. The number of people I saw decline rapidly after retirement or laying in hospital beds, and upon getting to know their story, realized it was preventable. So that's how I made this big old shift after years in academia and practicing in different health systems to retirement wellness strategies. So again, thank you for inviting me to be here.
Absolutely. And so what are some of the things we're going to talk about today or we are going to be talking about today, some of the things that you can put into your bucket? We do an exercise. Well, you're pulling that up. We do an exercise in our workshops, our Concierge Medicine Forum each year. You can go to conciergemedicinepharm.com, and our guest today is Michelle Fritsch. You can go to retirewellness.com. And one of the exercises we do, you actually see behind me, is with a Yeti bucket. And yes, Yeti has a bucket. I don't know exactly why they created it, but they saw a need and they filled a need in the market. And you can buy the same bucket, well, not the exact same bucket, but you can buy a bucket at any large big box retailer for a couple of dollars, or you can buy a Yeti bucket that's a little bit differently designed. It's a little bit sturdier, and you pay a premium for that. And we ask physicians in these workshops, hey, on these red buckets, these ordinary, regular buckets, we want you to write on the buckets everything that you do not like about the practice of medicine, everything you hate about your job. And I was teaching 3 workshops at the time on the same morning, and we used this exercise in each of those. And the buckets filled up so quickly in the first workshop that we had to bring in the additional buckets for all of the things that they were putting and writing inside of the buckets, outside of the buckets, that they did not like about their job as the business of medicine, as a practitioner, as a physician. And on the Yeti bucket, what we had them do is write everything that they love about their job, the big idea that they came here with that energizes them, invigorates them, makes them feel like Monday morning at the office, at the practice, is not a penalty box anymore. And so thanks you for bringing this topic up, because we're going to jump right in, and I'll let you go ahead and start.
I love the bucket idea. My mind is still on it. It is such a great idea. And I think we all need that purge, if you will, to be able to address those things and say, yeah, I do have some things that I am not thrilled about. And then kind of get rid of that and then focus on the bigger things, because we know we've got to get rid of the stress to get that creative part of our brain really working. I love that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to let you go ahead as we transition into your presentation, and go ahead and begin with us, Michelle.
I will do it. So this is just a visual of what I kind of just mentioned, that health is so much more than the physical, but I think most people, most kind of lay people, kind of stop their definition of health at physical. But we know as professionals that all of these other things are important, and a large amount of data has been collected. There is research to back this up. That certainly we know that mental health is critical, and it finally has reached its level of support that it needs to have within insurance and available resources that mental health and mental health conditions need to be addressed in the realm of a physician's care for a patient. And then the emotional piece is more that kind of, I think of that as more the roller coaster, not necessarily a diagnosis, but how are people managing stress and change, not only in their regular life, but that transition to retirement. A lot of times people think, well, it's just another normal life phase. But in reality, a lot of people struggle, and that comes out a lot in their emotional health and how they deal with those transitions in their life, which we'll talk about today more, and their social health, because for a lot of people, retirement means moving from one group of people that you spend a ton of time with to an entirely different social network. And that can come as a shock if we don't sort of plan for it. And then spiritual health, whatever that looks like for that person, it's a component that needs to be addressed for that person, because when it's out of balance and not addressed, it again impacts rocks the whole boat of somebody's overall health. So I hope that kind of makes some sense of why I'm passionate about pulling these pieces together, especially in the realm of somebody transitioning to that next phase of life.
No, absolutely. And I think that, we had a conversation about this with a physician just a couple of weeks ago. And one of the aspects of planning for retirement was the mental stress and the emotional stress, in some cases, the physical stress of the financial side of, I'm preparing for selling my practice. This has been a big, deal to get this ready to sell. I just don't know if I'm quite ready to retire, or, financially. I wish I could retire. And so certainly these are all the most important things to put into the bucket of creating good health and preparing for retirement. And isn't the transition to retirement just a really, we want it to seem like this normal life event, but how many people really need, um, you know, really need to get involved in this?
I think for some reason, it seems to be different with today's generation that's retiring. So the boomers, as they retire. And I don't know that I've seen any real definitive, succinct explanation as to why they're struggling more. But I think of the four pitfalls that I'm seeing that kind of led me to change my career to focus here. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to those.
Yep.
We talked about this a little bit last week. I won't skip completely. That just again how these things are pulled together. We all need meaning and purpose, and retirement often shifts what that meaning and purpose is. It becomes something new. We all need to feel like we really belong and know what our self-worth is oriented in, and we all need to be loved. And so all of our patients have this big transition. And then as we think about healthcare professionals and physicians, this is, I think, sometimes an even deeper struggle to retire for the reasons you just talked about. Who am I? I've been a physician. I have cared for people. I've been an anchor of my community. People have needed me constantly for my entire career. Who will I be at the next phase? And what is my self-worth? I'm a physician. Who am I in that next phase? Who's going to be that group of supportive people where I am able to love and be loved when it's no longer all of the patients that I care for? That's a huge transition.
Well,
And then,
before we
yeah,
jump
yeah,
onto that,
yeah,
I want to stay on that lily pad for a moment. Let's talk about friendships, because
yeah.
males, as a trend, males are not as good at the social aspect of retaining those friendships over years. I know for me recently, I just had lunch on Saturday with some old friends from college, 20 plus years ago now. And, it was great to see them. It was great to reconnect. And as you walk away from that experience, that environment, you're like, we really need to do a better job of staying in touch. And, let's not make this another 20 years before we do this again. Let's plan a trip all together, or, let's, do something. Talk about the importance of, you know, relationships outside of medicine for the physician that's considering retiring. Like, you're not going to talk to the same people in retirement day one, month number 17, that you were talking to 2, 3 years ago. So should I be reinvigorating some of those old good relationships with my friends? Because males especially are not good at keeping those relationships informed. Like, I think it was saw a statistic where it was males are passing away and their average friend group is usually like 1.5 people.
You're hitting the nail on the head of so many things I was planning to talk about today. You're right. And that's why I focus primarily on men. A number of women want to think through and plan their retirement transition as well. But women in general have a bigger social network going into retirement that's outside of work, which is kind of what you just said. And then women tend to recognize the importance of those relationships and have an easier time building new ones. So let's say somebody not only retires, but they move to an entirely new community, and the group of friends that they spent time with before will no longer be, across the street and nearby. In general, big generality, but in general, women have an easier time of saying, well, I'm going to go join the this club or the that club, or I'm going to go to specifically meet all the new neighbors and introduce myself. In general, women are quicker to do those things than men, as you said. I think when men do encounter those friendships and come back across those people, they enjoy it very much. But sometimes even then, if it's been initiated sometimes by the women more often than the men, like when college groups have reunions, or high school groups have reunions, or medical school groups have reunion, kind of who's behind that, who's really driving that. And a lot of times it's not, the initiator behind it is not so much the men, for whatever reason that is.
Wow.
Which kind of leads to this next slide I was going to, that how do you handle the negatives in life? And I've seen too many people that when they get to retirement, it's almost like the joy bubble burst, and there's more and more emphasis on the negative things that are around. And I see men fall into this pattern of despair. And so this is one area where physicians, I think, can be talking to people, all people, but especially men that are nearing retirement, about strategies to kind of prepare for that, and to have things to look forward to, and have a plan for that dark feeling that can kind of sink in sometimes when you feel like you've lost who you are and who you're going to be in that next phase. Because we know that when people aren't dealing well with those stresses, that a lot of negative things happen. Weight and stress, stress management, coping skills, when they're not great, lead to weight gain and increased pain responses. People are more, pain feels amplified. That can lead to overuse, misuse of substances, even addictions. And when people's fuses are short, it increases risk of abuse and violence as well. So we've been kind of anticipating that when the doors open after COVID and people have been this stressed for this long, we're going to see more of these things. But I think this transition to retirement, if someone doesn't have coping skills and they're not prepared for that change of self, that it can lead to some of these negative outcomes as well. And we know when people are feeling isolated, self-pity, my life changed, I didn't want it to change, I've lost, my joy bubble has burst, that in general, that can lead to poor health. So I think today we kind of think about, how do we, if we've got clients, patients who we know are nearing that time of retirement, how do we open these conversations about, are they really prepared for how much their life's about to change? And do they have a plan for moving into retirement in a more positive, hopeful way, and know that those relationship changes you just talked about are on their way?
Wow.
I'm going to take a sip. Mm-hmm. You and I talked a little bit last time about my big reason for making this change were 4 things in particular that I was just seeing too much of. And I'd love to hear feedback if y'all are seeing this among your patient groups, your colleagues, your friend groups. It seems that up to 60% of men, and especially we're talking boomer men, because this doesn't seem, either was not such an issue for prior generations, or we just weren't at a place where we could really capture it and deal with it. But the 4 things that I'm seeing are divorce rates in people over 50 are way up. And I think that's very multifactorial. Relationships change, which is exactly what you were just talking about, that who you spend your time with throughout the day dramatically shifts when you go from your full-time practice to whatever comes after that. And then loss of self, kind of losing who you are as a person. If you're defined as a physician, if you're defined as the CEO of a company, your patient, if your patient is defined as the owner of their company, whatever, whoever they would have described themselves as being in the peak of their career, are they prepared for that to go away and for something else to take its place when they enter retirement? Because if they enter retirement with no plans for that, that's where I see people really lose themselves. And I think you mentioned this earlier, the increasing suicide rates is one of the horrible measurable outcomes that we're seeing as boomer men are reaching the retirement years. Is that making sense?
Absolutely. Well, why do you suppose the divorce rate is rising for those over age 50?
I think it's a number of things. And one of them is definitely communication of just so many stories. I'll give a couple where a couple talked a lot in their early days of their marriage about where they want to be. You know, once the kids are raised and they're out and we kind of approach retirement, what do we want to do? And so the two of them had confirmed that, yeah, they really wanted to travel. They had a list of places they'd like to go. And the man postponed retirement a couple of times within the last, say, 5 years before actually retiring. His wife went ahead and retired at her designated time. So she then had a couple of almost 3 years where she was retired and kind of figuring out this new life. He was still working. And then in the meantime, a couple of grandkids were born. And so when he retired and was ready to get on a plane and start traveling, she'd committed to start watching the grandchild 1 or 2 times a week. And so the idea of being gone for a couple of weeks on a big trip had changed. But it turns out they hadn't talked about it until he'd actually retired. And then they realized they had just kind of really different ideas of what these next years would look like. And just a little more communication leading up to that would probably have made that less stressful for them.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah, there was another one. The man's a CEO, very, very, very close to retirement. And he and his wife, well, I don't know what the communication was like before, but they reached a point where he loves to golf. He's got 5 colleagues, 5 buddies that love to golf. And these men came together and decided they were going to all retire to Florida. They all had different sort of communities that they wanted to be in, but they had a set of golf clubs, golf courses that were in between the homes that the places that they wanted to live. So this particular man had picked the community he thought would be ideal for he and his wife. And before he actually like made it official, they had a conversation and she said, "Have I not told you I will never live in Florida?"
Mm.
And
Wow.
they're still struggling with that. That's been a year and a half ago, and they're still trying to figure out, well, where does their future lie? Because I don't think he dreamed that Florida would not be a reasonable option for them.
Wow. Yeah, starting that conversation early, I got a bunch of kids and I got a loving wife, and certainly, difficult conversations, challenging conversations, financial conversations, living space conversations, starting those early, you eventually air out all the challenges, and then, months later, maybe a couple of years later, you both come to, I never thought I would want to live in this area, but I could really see myself making a life down there, and I feel like I could still have the relationships with my friends or those people I'm wanting to hang out with. Our guest today is Michelle Fritsch. She is the CEO and founder of Retirement Wellness Strategies. You can go to retirewellness.com, and I'm going to go ahead and let you continue as we walk down the path of the next portion of your presentation.
Thank you. I think now we kind of dive into relationships. And so if you've got a patient that's nearing retirement, helping them realize that relationships shift significantly with retirement. I've got a tool that kind of helps people define who are the 20 people beyond family, who are the 20 people that you're spending most of your time with right now. And then we think about as you near retirement and you're going to start announcing this retirement, what's the logical, correct order to communicate that information? Who are the people that just cannot hear this through the grapevine? And so how are you going to relay this information to key partners? How are you preparing your successor, whatever that looks like, to take over your role? How are you going to communicate with your network? What about your direct reports that, your assistants or your technicians or whoever, and then other people? So start kind of fanning out the bigger picture of who needs to know that you're thinking about retirement so that they can be honored by hearing it from you at the appropriate time, but also which of those relationships is going to carry forward into that next phase of life. There was a man who was an executive in one of the big financial firms, and he had an entire ministry, if you will. He grew he was a farmer when he wasn't at work. So he was in a suit during the day and in his overalls at night, and had this big farm that was raising food for people that did not have money. So he served the underserved of a large city by growing over 1 million pounds of food every year. So I thought his transition would be pretty easy. He was ready to be able to go full time with his farm. He really struggled. He went from one of those positions where there were probably people lined up outside his door all day long that needed to ask him questions, needed his input, a full agenda of meetings and phone calls to make and to receive, and probably, people to have lunch with and meet up after work, and lots of company associated events like evenings and weekends. Very full calendar, and was looking forward to releasing all of that and being able to work on his farm. And it really hit him that first few weeks that how in the world could they have needed me 24/7, and now that company is carrying forward as if no hiccup, as if I was never there.
Yeah.
And he actually tried to go back to sort of be a consultant because he just knew they were going to need his help in those first few weeks or months after he left. And he got back and everybody was nice to him, but they didn't need him.
Yeah.
That was a big blow to just sort of who he is as a person, even though he had a big plan for what he was going to do with his time.
Well, and this leads into a next question.
It's a really great thing. You've got an idea, you've got a medical practice, you've got patients who come in and out, but that thing that you want to do called concierge medicine, there's a learning curve to it. Do you want to accept insurance? Do you want to participate in Medicare? Do you want to do a hybrid practice? What's your staff going to look like? Are you going to incorporate different tests inside of the office? And if you're interested in me speaking a little bit of truth to you, and sometimes it's not as easy as we think. We want somebody to just say, oh yeah, you can do this right away. It'll take you like a week. Sometimes we don't really want to hear that. There's the learning curve to this. And the speakers that you're going to hear, the presentations and courses that you have access to within this community are here designed especially for you. Please go check them out.
Let the notes flow, a symphony. Now I can see things differently.
He got back and everybody was nice to him, but they didn't need him.
Yeah.
That was a big blow to just sort of who he is as a person, even though he had a big plan for what he was going to do with his time.
Well, and this leads into a next question. It's kind of a two-part question. We talked about the part of the process to explore relationships prior to retirement. And I want you to tell us more about that. But before you do, so that's the second part of the question, is the resignation of and release of your ego. And that is, that might take time for some. It's not an overnight thing. It's not a 1 week thing. It's not I'm going to go on a trip to, France and with my wife for 3 weeks, and I'm going to come back a different person. And I'm not going to feel like I need people to check in with me and I need to check in with them. How long does it take in your experience in working with different individuals and doctors for that struggling to release that ego portion that I'm important and now I'm not, but I still need to feel important? Because if we don't release that, we've seen people, you've seen them more often than not, they don't release that ego, and it might take 2, 3, 4, 10 years. Maybe it takes shorter or longer than other. I want you to explain some of that. To have that full life, you've got to release that ego portion of your psychological mental to have a happier full life. So talk to us about the process of exploring relationships prior to retirement and what you're seeing out there.
You've hit the nail on the head that these are conversations we need to have. And I haven't seen like one particular time frame. There have been people like the one I just mentioned who I thought it was going to be a really quick, easy transition for him, and it was not. And then I've had others who kind of wandered into it with no plan at all and did just fine, kind of stayed happy-go-lucky. So it's not one answer, but I've definitely found that if people can plan ahead and really let it sink in that this is going to happen and not let it shock them, they do a lot better. You mentioned, they go away to France for 3 weeks with the wife. Some people think that is the answer. I've got a trip planned. We've been wanting to do this, we're celebrating a big anniversary or whatever. This is our thing. And you get back from the trip, and then who are you? That brings to mind someone who, in his profession, was a household name. Everybody across the country and much of the world knew who he was. And the time of retirement came a little earlier than he expected. He was at a point where he had a really high profile position and thought he was going to jump into another one that didn't pan out. And so he went ahead and went into retirement. So again, there wasn't a lot of planning. It happened a little quicker than he thought. And you can tell when you speak to him now, if he's in the process of planning a big trip with his wife, he's in a better mood. If the trip is upon them, he's in a better mood. If it's right after the trip and he can still talk about the trip, but then he goes into like the dark period where if there's not another trip right around the corner, he's kind of lost who he is. He's more negative. I always found this person to be very inspiring. I knew him before this, and now I don't know. I think I call it, sometimes people become a shell of themselves. He's just not the same person because he hasn't figured out who he is in this phase other than planning the big trips.
Let's, your experience as a pharmacist, but your experience here in helping physicians and professionals retire well and finish well, because that legacy is so important to many physicians that,
Yes.
you've helped your community for 40, 50, 60 years, or maybe not 60, but you get it.
Maybe
Yeah,
60,
maybe, you never
stuff.
know. I mean, we've all met a 90-year-old doctor.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about your experience and what you've seen with your physicians and clients is the importance of marriage counseling as a kind of a tool to use, because we all think, well, you only go to marriage counseling. I think the old school approach for many, maybe possibly boomers, is you only go to marriage counseling if you're in trouble, you need help. Well, you can see the storm on the horizon. You see that he is going into a dark period after a trip is over. And like, I don't want you there after the 3-week trip, after you've retired 4 weeks ago, you're going to be sitting on that couch. And you're going to be a bump on a log. So how important is marriage counseling, those types of getting yourself psychologically ready for this and your spouse ready for this? Because maybe she's like not looking forward to you, or he's not looking forward to you retiring. And you're like, I wish he would work some more. Like, I am not looking forward to this. And hasn't communicated that to him. So I'll talk a little bit about some of your stories, your experiences you've seen with that. And our guest today is Michelle Fritsch of Retirement Wellness Strategies. Go to retirewellness.com to learn more.
I've seen this a lot, and every marriage is different. So if your patient or you yourself have that great relationship with your spouse, but this is just not a topic you've talked about for a while, then certainly I encourage you sitting down and taking some time and thinking it through, what you want to do with yourselves, what you want that phase of life to look like. But if you struggle at all, there's certainly no shame in getting some help. And so as a provider for your patients, I think it's absolutely acceptable, and I think important to ask, have they had these conversations as retirement is coming? Are they on the same page? And if they were on the same page 30 years ago, that doesn't mean that they still are today. So is that a current discussion that they're ready to talk about? And if there are disagreements, I've found a growing number of professionals that can help in this area. It might be faith-based counselors for them. And then there are there was a time that when a marriage was on the rocks, it sort of was going that legal direction, and you had those people that could help navigate a separation between the people. But I'm finding, because I don't do these things myself, I make referrals, I'm finding a growing number of options of counselor types that you can refer patients to that will just help them listen to each other and communicate better. And so it's not to say that they need counseling, that they're in trouble or anything. It just helps to open that conversation and allow it to be a little more open and honest, and make sure that there's agreement in all of the different areas before they stumble across problems that they realize they could have prevented. So ask about the stress points, make sure that they individually and together have kind of thought about what are going to be their areas of connection. Where are they going to be socially connected, whether it's old friendships, new friendships. I keep telling my husband we're going to take ballroom dance lessons. I don't have him on board with that just yet, but what are some things that they want to do together? But then I think it's important to do it individually as well, because I've seen all these instances where the woman's got a really full agenda and the man is kind of left not knowing. There's one man, he was an executive in 2 different health systems. And his work pattern was he would get to work really early in the morning so that he had everything completely ready to go before all of the staff, the day shift, showed up. And then he would stay well into the evening, making sure that the second shift was, off on a right start. And he had everything kind of buttoned up, ready for the next day. So the reality became he was at home less than 8 hours, and that included greeting his spouse, having a meal, whatever evening activities he had, and sleep, and then getting ready to go again the next day. So their overlap was, in my mind, very, very small. And then they had whatever was their weekend time, but they had kids, so one's taking one to swim practice and one's taking one, to some other activity. And so they got to the point of retirement, and he felt that, she had just been waiting for this day all this time, waiting for him to retire. And instead, the conversation was, you're not going to be in this house.
Oh, wow.
And that hit him hard, wow,
Yeah.
we're not prepared for this. And so in those cases, I think counseling would be really helpful to open conversations that obviously haven't been occurring. And so there's going to be a lot to dig through. I think a skilled person could really help them with that.
Wow. No, that's amazing. That's a good story, and I think that hits a lot of people pretty good. Thank you for sharing the different types of questions. Feel free to allude or expand upon those. The types of questions a physician could ask to help ease the relationships of patients approaching retirement. So I'll let you continue on your next slides.
Okay. And just to kind of pull that back around, when your patients' relationships are falling apart, their mental health is going to decline. The risk of depression and or anxiety goes way up. They're more likely to end up with chronic pain conditions, not take good care of themselves. They're more likely to sit more, and weight can go up. That whole spiral of declining health can get started pretty quickly. So the more that can be done on this front end to help them plan for this transition and make it smooth, the ideal is that we're going to keep their health steady, if not improved, once they have more time to be out and doing and being physically active and enjoying themselves, ideally enjoying themselves more.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to answer this question based on your experience, and that is, when you talk with a retiree, we have some on either side of our house, where we live in our neighborhood, and usually when the subject of a physician comes up, it is not usually in the area of, yeah, they help me prepare mentally, emotionally, and physically for retirement. It's like, let me tell you about that. Let me tell you, he's the greatest, or she's the greatest, or they're the worst. Like, I would never go back there. Those are usually the stories that come up. So do physicians see themselves, or do practitioners see themselves as helping their patients? They know that patient, this subset of patients in their patient panel are approaching retirement. I don't know if they necessarily see themselves as having permission or influence in that area of their life, which I believe they should have. They should make time. They should make the effort. We've talked a little bit about, over the years of the importance of the doctor bringing up the idea of like, hey, do you have a legacy drawer in your house? Patient XYZ, John, Jane. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means you got a will, you got a healthcare directive. And it's like, oh, I've never even thought about that. Well, it's just something maybe you might want to think about when you go home. Talk to Mary about it. And, y'all make sure you get that done because you guys are approaching retirement here in 3-4 years. And I don't know if a lot of physicians, and I want you to shed some light into that dark corner of a physician's practice where they feel like, I don't feel like I have permission or that's my responsibility. And I really wish that more physicians would take upon that mantle of responsibility and say, we need to talk about your retirement here, Mike, because you and Kelly got some things to figure out.
I'm so glad you asked that question and that you asked it the way you did. I think we all need to think of medicine as a team sport. It is not a solo practice. It's a team sport. And as the physician, especially your concierge physicians, you are one of the most intimate, trusted relationships in that person's life. I mean, you are an absolute cornerstone rock in that person's life. And we know that in caring for them, if we don't help them look at their life and their health in this broader picture, that it's going to come back to negatively impact their physical health. And so in a way, you're helping, it's insurance for yourself as the provider. You're going to keep your client healthy and functional for a longer period of time if you're helping them think through things in this broader area. And that doesn't mean you've got the answers as the provider, but you've got your teammates in line. So you have some quick and good, vetted, solid resources that work with you either directly or just people in your community, that when somebody needs these other layers of care, you can make those referrals. And as you coming from that absolute integral person in that person's life, to be able to say, here are some counselors that I find are wonderful. Here's 3 or 4. Why don't you check them out and choose one, because that's really going to be important in helping you move to this next part of life. Or you don't have a lawyer to help you pull together your legal documents. Here's some lawyers in town that are absolutely great. Why don't you give one of them a call? And so I think we all need to be responsible for knowing who is our team and being able to make those referrals without having to go research it and think about it. Know who those people are so that as you ask your key questions and uncover things, you can send your patient off to those resources that can take care of those aspects of their life.
Absolutely. And a patient who is appreciated, and by asking those questions, I always say, I'm not a physician, but I am a patient, and I know what it's like to sit on the other side of you. And I know that if my physicians in my life ask me those questions, hey, challenge me to ask those questions, whether they gave me a referral to help me with that next step, that's great. But to know that he or she actually cares enough to even ask, it has to go. It creates a memorable experience that then leads to a remarkable experience that's actually worth remarking to others about. And these doctors are saying, well, I grow my practice by word of mouth patient referrals. Well, most of the referrals most of the stories that patients are telling out there in your community are not positive ones about your practice for most healthcare providers. And we don't ask 10 people what their last doctor's office visit was like, and they'll tell you exactly how they feel. And so let's give patients something remarkable to talk about as they approach retirement so that they're bragging on you. And you've created this sales force for free, essentially, of current patients that are saying, you wouldn't believe my doctor's amazing.
And my doctor cares about me so deeply. He's helping me look at my entire life and all these things that impact my health.
Absolutely.
Love that.
Well, since many relationships will change, what does this mean for the first few days of retirement?
Again, I think it comes back to the planning and knowing, having people be prepared that that first couple of weeks might be rough, and I've had some instances where once people can see what retirement's going to be and they're excited about it, that transition's pretty smooth. So a couple of examples of that. Um, just recently, an executive went through a purpose process. This is what we're going to talk about in part 3, and found that he's just really got a passion for the environment and all this climate change that's happening. And so as his retirement's starting to get close, he decided to be on a board of directors of a board of directors of a nonprofit that has something to do with the environment. And not that he's necessarily going to be affiliated with this organization forever, but by getting himself on the board, he's starting to self-educate on this topic that he wants to know more about. And so he's already getting connected in that aspect of the world, which has nothing to do with what he's doing in his current job, so that when he retires, he'll already have sort of hit the ground running, if you will. He'll have some things going on in that area to move toward. So I think having people think about it ahead of time and start engaging with that aspect of their life makes that easier. But it's definitely worth a discussion. That first doctor visit after their retirement, check in on their mental health, check in on how their ego is managing this huge change that they've just gone through, and let them know that if they're struggling, that's quite normal, and they're the counseling's available, but also they're sort of released now to think about where they might want to. They've accumulated all these skills and these passions over time. How can they use those in brand new ways?
Our guest is Michelle Fritsch, as she's a PharmD, as well as the CEO and founder of Retirement Wellness Strategies. You can go to retirewellness.com. We'll put all of her information and contact information in the links below as well. You might appreciate this. We've talked in the last couple of years, and it's really a little bit more popular outside of the United States, and that's the idea of social prescribing, and how we have identified or refined the definition of social prescriptions, social prescribing for doctors is, you as a physician have interests and hobbies that you're interested in outside of the four walls of your practice. So my physician, for example, he's also an avid kayaker in the Georgia area. And so he invites, 3, 4, 6, maybe it's 12. This was pre-pandemic days, but also inside of the pandemic, you can kayak in socially distanced. If you're not socially distanced in kayaking, you're doing something wrong. Anyway, I've noticed that form of social prescribing, where a doctor has initiated hobbies and said, I'm inviting you to participate with me in this. Another physician said, I love competitive cycling, and a way for me to stay active and ready for the next event. I don't invite my patients to these events. If they want to, they can, but I don't talk about them. These are for me. But in a way for me to train for these events is to cycle regularly, weekly, 2, 3, 4 times a week. And so I invite patients once a month to join me at this particular park and on their bikes, and I'll talk to them and we'll go for a long ride, those that can hack it. And another one in the Midwest started a walking group, and this walking group has met monthly or every other week for over a decade now, I believe. And so those forms of social prescribing, as a physician, you're getting your patients involved in your interests. And those are things that they can look forward to in retirement and be like, yeah, I never thought I would like kayaking, or never thought I would like walking or bicycling, but I look forward to this group. And the doc doesn't even have to be there the entire time. Maybe it's, they're a group of people that now meet up regularly. So
Yeah.
I'm sharing that because as a pharmacist, you understand, some of that, the importance of that social aspect, that social prescribing out there. And you're welcome to elaborate on that as well.
Oh, I think that's a real, I've never heard that term used, but I love the concept. There's one group of people that's recently retired from a place that I worked many, many years ago. And so I've been talking to them about their plans. And you mentioned the cycling. One of them was already a cyclist, and the three of them retired approximately the same time and wanted to do things together. So the other two have started cycling, and then one of them, the daughter, purchased one of those recumbent bicycles.
Mhm.
And so now they're all into recumbent cycling. But there's just something that they've been able to explore and enjoy and challenge themselves and increase their distances and their speed. And it's been a very engaging thing for them. So another idea along those lines is I love all of the ways that people are starting to teach each other to cook in more healthy ways.
Yeah.
And so you could also, as a physician, lead a cooking class. And these days you can do it virtually and help people make better decisions about the foods that they eat, but make that a fun, engaging group activity as well.
Yes, my daughter and son actually just did that last week through our local community college, and they cooked mom and dad dinner. And I don't know if you can see this, but I thought that was a rather interesting way for local, doctor. Like those are our kids making broccoli and macaroni and cheese, and they each got into a little competition
I
about
love that.
who added more cheese. Did you follow the directions? And they were being led over an iPad. And I noticed even with painting classes or different things like that over the pandemic, that you as a physician could lead not just your local patients virtually. If you like painting, for instance, like we're going to color by number tonight, you could lead and invite patients or people from all over the world to join in this. And then the conversations that happen with someone in Prague and someone in Georgia and someone in California, lead to this enthusiasm. Like that was a really cool thing. I'm going to do that next Tuesday night in my retirement years. I heard another person say, I have gone down the YouTube University, wormhole, and I'm learning about lattes and making coffee. And that is a deep, deep wormhole of how to make a great cup of coffee or a great latte that these people in retirement are learning from. And, I had one
Right.
older person, he said, I wish I could go back 20 years and relearn some of the things that I've learned, because as I'm trying to express interest in these things, I'm not as enthused about the things I was interested in 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And I'm finding new things to learn about, and that's keeping my mind, my emotional, mental health fresh as I'm in these retirement years now. Our guest today is Michelle Fritsch. She's the CEO and founder of Retirement Wellness Strategies, also a pharmacist. Um, as physicians, as we close with the last couple of questions, as physicians, are there any other particular items to consider to help their patients cope and prepare for retirement, be in retirement? I got a patient coming in this afternoon, he says, and I don't know what I'm going to talk to her about, related to her retirement, because she's not doing well.
Oh my goodness. First of all, your previous conversation reminded me that extreme importance of staying mentally healthy. And so YouTube University or whatever that challenges people to learn or relearn new things, we know also is going to help keep them mentally sharp and perhaps decrease the time before they might experience dementia-related functional decline. And so there are so many ways, it feels like we've exploded since COVID, the number of ways that people continue to learn things. So like I was speaking to former CEO of a big health system, and he's learning guitar. And not only is he learning, learning the physical maneuvering and the notes, but he's learning a whole different appreciation, he said, of sort of music theory. And so it's just challenging his brain in so many different ways, and he's loving it. Just adding that to the repertoire of things that he's always known as a very successful leader of a health system.
I could see that this would be very easy for a physician in in his or her practice to implement next week. For example, to do a 1 hour webinar or 1 hour in-person meeting, with a small gathering of patients who are nearing retirement, say you need to be 50 or up, but anybody can come, of course. But to just discuss what we're talking about here, and say, here's some identified areas that you need to prepare for retirement. Here's some potential hobbies, and here's ways that you can go be a part of these learning groups, these cooking groups, these cycling groups, these walk with your doctor groups. We're offering some in our practice. Great way to market your practice, talk about your practice, advertise it. So as our last question is, what can we expect to add to our retirement planning in part 3 of our next discussion?
Well, before we get there, because I got us behind in our questions,
Yep.
I think physicians have an especially large chasm to cross when they retire. Again, there's been such a need. People have needed you day in and day out throughout your entire career. So who are you after that? And certainly there are the easy answers of being on, boards of directors, of health initiatives within your community, and those are great. But I think in addition to things we've talked about for you to address with your patients, I think one of the most difficult decisions that any healthcare provider, and especially a physician, makes is, when am I going to let go? When am I going to stop chasing the CEs and try to stay up to date in medicine? Because we've spent all of our lives struggling to keep up with this onslaught of new information constantly coming at us. And when am I going to let go of that license that I worked so desperately hard to get and maintain? Talk about a life-altering decision. That one is really big. I know as providers, you've probably worked with patients, when they give up the car keys, and how incredibly difficult that is. I think this one's 10 times that. Giving up that license. I'm going to declare to the world and to myself that I am no longer a practicing physician. I'm no longer the most up-to-date source for people that have medical questions. So the more you can prepare for that, and almost like a quit smoking date for your patients that do all that lead up to that big day where they're going to put away the cigarettes. How can you make that a time to look forward to, and as a reward to yourself of a job incredibly well done, rather than my life as I know it just ended? That mindset around that critical day makes all the difference, I think, as to how fulfilled you're going to be in that next phase, using all the skills and talents you have, but just doing it for new reasons and new ways.
Thank you for sharing that. What do you say to the physician that comes to you and says, no one's given me permission. I feel like I'm quitting. Like, I feel like I worked this hard. It's tough for me to let go. And I don't feel like I have permission, and when they're the only ones that need to give themselves that permission.
It is. It's a very personal decision. I'm sure you're going to do due diligence to make sure that all of your patients have a safe place to land. You've communicated with their new physicians. You've got your documents in order so that new physician can pick up where you left off and be clear as to what were your objectives with that particular patient, so that the patient will be well cared for. It's that personal mindset, making that really big life choice that I'm ready to do new things. And there are probably 1,000 things that have interested you along the way that you've just not had the bandwidth to address. So, pick some of those favorites and just accept that in this new life phase, I'm going to be a different person doing different things. I am now freed and released to go pursue my other interests.
Wow. And to leave them with a couple of handles, you have written a book, Preventive Maintenance for a High Mileage Life. Where can they go to pick up that? And are there any other books or audio books or podcasts you would like to recommend for them too?
I would love to do that. And sort of along these lines, I have one last slide here, that there are things that people can do to try to take that more positive outlook to a time like transition. to retirement. So finding new ways to be engaged, and we've kind of talked about that. More of an optimistic mindset switch, having those supportive friends and family, reconnecting with old friends, so that you've got relationships that are now going to sustain through that next phase of life. That ability to bounce back, which is again more of a mindset thing. Conflict management skills and coping skills. There are so many classes and strategies out there that if you feel like that's not one of your gifts, there are ways to improve that. I don't think any of us are born with good conflict management skills, but we can learn to do better so that our fuse doesn't get really short. We don't become really grumpy in retirement, but rather we're able to kind of roll with the waves, if you will, and enjoy that time. And then higher power, that spiritual health piece, whatever that looks like for you, all of those are the things that, again, we've got evidence to support them being part of a longer, healthier, fulfilled, better immune system kind of long life. So
Wow.
I did want to leave you with just a few things that I think can really enhance that transition to the next phase. But you mentioned the book. Here's the title of it. So thank you for mentioning that.
Absolutely. And, I recently have stumbled onto, stumbled into the wormhole or dropped into the wormhole of, nature and conservation.
Yeah.
Not the climate change aspect of that, but just nature and conservation. And it's fascinating to, we have the Appalachian Trail here. And actually, it was funny enough, we took their, scouts up there about a year or two ago. And one of the guys, the I don't know if if we would call him a park ranger, but he was a former high profile, in business of healthcare kind of guy,
Yeah.
and he is long since retired, and he's like, hey, I have to walk 8 miles to get here, and then I sleep here for a night or two. I meet new people like every day. Some I probably wouldn't ever want to meet again. But I get to meet new people, I get to exercise, and I get to do something that I enjoy, which is being out in nature. And then, my wife gets the benefit of not seeing me for a couple of days. And so it gives us a break too. So, I
Love
think
that.
that the importance of never stop learning,
Yeah.
podcasts have been incredibly helpful for a lot of people. You can recommend that to your patients as well, to say, find an area. There's tons of podcasts out there about all kinds of things. You want to go down a wormhole on something obscure, go for it.
You can
There's
do it.
that out there. What other books or podcasts have you found that your clients and providers and those in healthcare are leaning into these days? Any recommendations?
On the retirement side, I've been impressed. A number of books have come out that describe some of the things I've talked about, kind of give people more strategies. There are some great retirement podcasts out there. A lot of times they're focused on the finances, but I'm starting to see more that are focused more on these other elements of moving into retirement just in a way that kind of fulfills all your needs. I've seen a couple of instances where people went back to what sometimes before you go to college, you've got 2 or 3 things that you think you want to be when you grow up.
Hmm.
Some people have gone back and they picked option A, so now they're gonna pursue option B and see if they still have an interest. So I think there's just so many ways. Once people can stop defining themselves by I am an attorney, I am an accountant, and can open to I'm somebody different now. Let me explore who that is. It really helps that transition.
And it enriches the relationships you have around you,
Yeah.
because now they don't see you as the grumpy doctor, or, the person who's you only ever got 5 minutes of your time. So I'm really not used to spending more than 10 minutes with you, and never really knew those things about you. So, learning and preparing is some of the takeaways we've learned here today. And what do we have to look forward to in part 3 as we add to this conversation?
Part 3 is the newest part for me to have added, and the more I've learned about it, the more I realize it is absolutely key to the whole thing. And we've hinted at it here, but it's figuring out that purpose, defining who you're going to be in the next phase, And so I've got more fun stories, and just kind of amazed at figuring that out can really help all these other aspects of health kind of fall into line.
Absolutely. And our guest today has been Michelle Fritsch. She's a pharmacist. She's the CEO and founder of Retirement Wellness Strategies. You can go to retirewellness.com. If you're listening to the audio portion of this, her information is in the links above and below. You go to retirewellness.com. The book that she mentioned is Preventive Maintenance for a High Mileage Life. For those of you car guys and gals out there, there's a Ford Mustang on the front cover. So any personal connection to that picture, or is that just...
Absolutely. That's my dad's racing Roush Mustang. So I'm anticipating the day when I get a call that my dad's out disturbing the peace with his fancy car. But that was his retirement plan, was he became a real car guy.
Wow, fun. All right. And speaking of that, I just got an email with a picture of I think it was a Skylark, a 60s Skylark from a physician, a concierge doctor, just this morning. So what we're talking about hits true. It's hitting home with doctors out there. So explore your interest, keep on learning, go to retirewellness.com. Thank you, Michelle. We look forward to part 3. And it's not about being the best doctor in the world anymore. It's about being the best doctor for the world, for your patients, and I would say for you and yourself and your spouse and those you love and care for in your retirement. So thanks, Michelle, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
One of my pain points in medicine, and that is, why the hell do we do what we do? Why do we do what we do? I would ask anybody out there practicing medicine, why the hell do we have waiting rooms? So that patients can come in to figure out how healthy they are for their annual exam while you sit them down next to somebody who's sick. So they've now given you time and money to leave your office experience sicker than when they showed up. I do not believe in waiting rooms.
If you start to believe in what you're doing, fear tends to become less of an issue. The first step is really
Thanks, man. It's great to be here, especially to be here with so many people that think the same and are all focused on the same thing, the patient. And I love being a part of it. So thanks for having me on today, Mike.
Absolutely.
Accepting that growth mindset, that's another thing that I've been reading about recently, accepting our growth mindset and not thinking that, well, the system has failed me or I've failed in this particular situation, but really thinking about, what have I learned? What can I bring with me that's useful to whatever I do next? How can I apply this thing that I've learned to whatever that next step might be for me? I think really those are some of the most helpful things that we can do, sort of starting from with,
that's me being defensive. What is going on for me? So the more physicians and leaders can continuously look inward, introspect, what's happening for me? And I would recommend, do not ask why questions. There is research from an organizational psychologist named Tasha Eurich. She is an expert in self-awareness, and she speaks about introspection. She finds that people who introspect with why questions are actually less happy than even those who don't bother to be introspective at all. Use what questions. Really drive what's happening for me, what's the story in my head, what is it that I want here, what can I do differently, and keep the attention here. So if I feel any kind of flare-up or tension, we tend to constrict, right? So like, I worked with one leader who his tendency when he got defensive was, you could see that he would get rigid, right? And it would be all through his shoulders and his neck and like his head, and like everything about it was different. So here's something really, really goofy. Can you wiggle? In a conversation, if it feels like it's going off course, can you in that moment, like, do you have the ability to wiggle your body? I know that I don't when I'm feeling defensive. And that is a test for me. That is a sign that I am defensive, and I can make a shift. I can go, oh, some kind of insecurity is being triggered in me, which means that I'm not showing up my best. What is happening for me? What is the story in my head that's causing that level of trigger and that level of defensiveness and that level of rigidity? Because when I get rigid, it's going to invite other people to also get
have
defensive.
access to me 24/7, and is my phone going to be ringing constantly off the hook, and how will I have a life of my own? And I found that the large majority of patients are not calling and texting you 24/7. But I think there's reassurance in knowing that they can, if that makes any sense. You know, just knowing that you will be there for me.
In small practice, we know that this is how we stay in business, by knowing business. And so to us, in solo and small group, and especially concierge medicine, these skills are part and parcel of taking good care of the patient.
What your patient has a problem is important, and I think that's where being a concierge physician gives me the edge, because I know my patient. I know who's a complainer, I know who's not a complainer. So if someone comes in and says, I feel short of breath and I'm a little winded, and he never does it, I know there is an issue. So I need to catch that up, and that is the key. And the most important thing is that I need to be mindful when I'm in the patient's room. If I'm in a patient's room and I'm thinking about, oh, I have to do that today, or I have to talk to Michael 2 hours later, then I'm not really paying attention and catching the vibes that my patient is giving me. So being there present and not looking at the computer screen and seeing in patient's eye, I think is the best answer I can give you. Exam will follow. If you don't catch what the person is saying, you won't do the right exam or test.
And we're coming in for a landing.
Give. So, you know, one of my mentors, John Maxwell, I'm sure you know John.
Oh, yeah.
What he taught me a long time ago, he says, Charlie, adding value to yourself, that's success, and that's okay. But when you add value to others, that's called significance, right? And I like that approach. And I've learned, if I can give to people that need help, doctors, if I can just give and I can show you how to implement and I can coach you before
we can remind everyone of what skills it requires to come across authentically and to build trust with patients in a virtual world. But also, how do we use these foundational communication skills in all of our interactions?
And for a lot of physicians, as you well know, you've had those conversations around the coffee table and kitchen table and island.
And that there are competing healthcare platforms and visions. And I'm not afraid to talk about it. So no matter who wins this.
We're all in this together, and the more we love and support each other through it, the easier it's going to be on the other side.
Like we tell our kids at home, my wife and I, we make sure you wash those thumbs. You can't forget about washing those thumbs too, because it's easy to wash the other 4 fingers. But...
Let the notes flow like a symphony. Now I can say things differently.
It's a really great thing. You've got an idea, you've got a medical practice, you've got patients who come in and out, but that thing that you want to do called concierge medicine, there's a learning curve to it. Do you want to accept insurance? Do you want to participate in Medicare? Do you want to do a hybrid practice? What's your staff going to look like? Are you going to incorporate different tests inside of the office? And if you're interested in me speaking a little bit of truth to you, and sometimes it's not as easy as we think. We want somebody to just say, oh yeah, you can do this right away. It'll take you like a week. Sometimes we don't really want to hear that. There's the learning curve to this. And the speakers that you're going to hear, the presentations and courses that you have access to within this community are here designed especially for you. Please go check them out.